So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Performance Assurance webinar. My name is Jenny, and I'll be facilitating today's event. And today I'm joined by Anton, V, Daniel, and Andrew. And just before we get started, I just want to go through some housekeeping with you all. So we do ask that you keep your cameras and your microphones off. The event will be recorded today, and there'll be an opportunity to refer back to these recordings on the rec portal, and the slides will also be made available with that. We will be using Slido throughout today, so the QR code is on the screen now, as well as the joining code if you don't want to use a QR code. And there will be opportunities for a Q&A throughout, so if you have any questions at any point, just type them into Slido. So as we're just waiting for people to scan that QR code, I will share the agenda in a moment. And this is the agenda for today. So I think without further ado, I will pass over to our first presenter, Anton.
Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join our webinar. As ever, we're here to talk to you about the performance assurance activities that the code manager performs. I noticed there's some people we've worked with for many years on the call, and perhaps some new names that I'm not so familiar with. We definitely come here to try and communicate things to you to make sure the kind of requirements are clear, but we're also here to kind of engage and talk to you as well. So as we go through, if there is something you'd like to speak to us about, please put up your hand. We'd love to take questions that kind of are natural at the right time. And of course, there's a Q&A at the end, which is really important. The kind of things that we're looking at are those in those hexes every month. You know what's happened in the past from a performance assurance perspective that we should share from the market. Kind of what are our priorities over the coming months and year. How might things change in relation to performance assurance, and how, I guess most importantly for you guys, how might these things impact you? So just as an intro, let's get into it. So I think if we move on to the next slide, our first topic is to look back at the quarter. So I'll hand it over to V.
Thanks, Anton. Brilliant. So we basically asked for a little feedback from all participants as to what is it that you want to hear more from us about every quarter. And one of the things that people said was we want to discuss issues more, we want to debate more, we want more discussion in these sessions. So to help facilitate some of that, we're reflecting on some key areas that the PAB has had to intervene on or has had discussions on in the last quarter. I'll talk through these. Please feel free to come off mute, raise your hand, discuss, like if you've got views, thoughts on these topics. But yeah, I'll talk about what we've been doing with PAB and what the sort of future activity you may see. The first one we've got is potential misuse of change of occupier flag. So since R155 was implemented, the requirements for like evidence for change of occupier for non-domestics been clarified. We've seen some changes in behavior on usage of the flag. We've also had some disclosures around potential misuse from certain parties. So altogether, we are very aware this is an area that PAB has been focusing on, but not just the last quarter for a bit more, but with R155 implementation, it's been on our radar for the last quarter. So we're currently proposing, so up until now, we've had risk drivers where we're looking at objection rates for change of occupier switches. But we're looking to also introduce risk drivers, which give us an idea of how frequently people are actually initiating switches with the change of occupier flag. So we are proposing to add new risk drivers so that we can see the use of it in the domestic and the use of it in the non-domestic side, and basically identify if any parties are outliers, like who may be using it more than everyone else in the market, and then basically have a chat with them, understand what's driving it, and ensure that it's all in line with the code. So that's one of the areas we've been looking at. Another area that we have been looking at is we've had disclosures about parties that have been carrying out meter works, either like things that MEMS, the meter installers in gas and electricity should be doing, or safe installation providers should be doing. But these organizations are not REC qualified. So in those instances, we're writing to these parties where we become aware, serving them cease and desist notices, and also will be issuing notifications to suppliers, ensuring, because like suppliers have obligations to make sure when you're asking an organization to carry out any meter works, you ensure that those organizations hold the right qualifications and right accreditations, so that we're not putting the consumer at risk. And yeah, so these qualifications are there in the market for a reason, so we must ensure that we're using the right organizations. Mark.
Yeah, just a thought on that one. If suppliers are requesting these organisations to work, surely that organisation, the supplier must be using the DTN in some form to tell them to do work, because that's the industry process. You send them a flow, go and do some meter work. So are these suppliers going completely outside of that process, or are parties somehow getting access to use MPEGs that they're not entitled to be using?
Do you mind if I just respond to that, to that, V? Actually, I don't, a lot of the history has been this supplier hub model, which is what it's a shorthand for what you're talking about. Actually, we're seeing that a lot of this is relating to meter works that don't relate to the supplier. The safe isolator provider, and I personally believe rightly, has broadened up the ability to have meter works when it's not requested by the supplier, when it's requested by the customer, and trying to do that in a way that the S is the key thing, is safe, but also involves the right communication. In this case, because I think it's exclusively electricity, with DNOs, so they know what's happening on the meter and they know if there's any safety events. So actually, Mark, if this was the part of metering that sits in that supplier hub model, actually it would be simpler. We would probably go talk to the supplier. The challenge here is that kind of broadening and evolution of the market, particularly relating to kind of new technologies like EVs, not super new, but new business models relating to them. I hope that's clear, Mark.
Yeah, no, it's just the fact that it was mentioned that you go into the suppliers, but it sounds like it's not a supplier. It sounds like it's more a non-supplier issue. It's more SIP, potentially either unqualified SIPs or SIPs doing stuff they're not supposed to do, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, so
that be fair?
Let's be fair, these are allegations, and in all cases of allegations, we don't assume that they're true. We investigate. But if there are allegations that an organisation is doing something that needs a qualification, without that qualification, we are concerned. We contact them. Obviously, we think about the specifics and contact them in a way that's tailored to the role. If it relates to other organisations here, so that could be the MEM or the supplier, we work with them as well. But mostly this isn't in that kind of MEM supplier world. This is in that SIP meter installer world.
Okay. Wait to see where that one goes then.
Moving along, on risk drivers, so we're also reviewing risk drivers, adjusting thresholds where we think they are either catching too many parties and thus not becoming very effective, or catching too many parties but we don't identify any underlying issue for it, or not catching enough parties but we are made aware that there might be an issue in the area. So one of the things we have seen, I think year on year, or half year on half year, has been close to the non-domestic contract renewal windows. We'd see, like in the month before, a spike in objections for non-domestic switches. So in order to ease the curve and not go to too many parties every time we look at March data or September data, we are, rather than looking at the risk driver score over a single month, we're going to look at it like if you're consecutively over a particular level for 2 months, then we'll come and apply PATs for you. So yeah, we're adjusting risk drivers based on market behaviors to make sure we're not wasting parties' time either. And then finally, clarification on annulments. So it was brought to PAB discussion point around potential like parties not being clear on when annulments can be used by the by suppliers. So we'll be taking more guidance to RIG tomorrow, and there's been comms in the bulletins, etc., about this as well. But primarily, the annulments process was designed as to give suppliers the ability where a customer comes and tells them that you've written to me saying I'm switching, but I've not agreed any contract with any other supplier, so I don't believe I'm switching. In those cases, the supplier can use annulments to prevent an erroneous transfer from happening. But again, the license is pretty clear on this. It needs to be the customer has initiated the contact and clearly disclosed to the supplier that they have not entered a new contract with the new supplier. So yep, that's the clarification on the annulments process. So those are some areas we've been looking at in the last quarter. If we go to the next slide as well, Jenny. We've done a bit of we've also done a bit of analysis of how quarter-on-quarter performance has sort of parties over thresholds has changed over some key areas that we looked at. So risk driver 8 is where we look at delayed switches. So this could be any of the objection event risk drivers, etc. We've actually seen double the number of parties over threshold in the last quarter than as compared to the previous quarter. So one of the reasons for this has been the implementation of R155 over in July, which has clarified when it's like what is needed to confirm a change of occupier event, and like the process for parties to be able to share evidence with each other. So we think that as a result, that's not an exception that scares us instantly, but we'll be doing a lot more work on the effectiveness of R155 and how the processes for change of occupier switches are working since its implementation and whether there's still need for more work to be done in that area. The other area we've looked at is inaccurate data, including address management. So over here, we've actually seen again an increase, not as much of an increase as the previous area, but we've still seen an increase in this area. And that's primarily driven by switching activity in the market. So one of the risk drivers in this is risk driver 10.3, where we look at the number of rejections you've received from CSS when you've tried to initiate a switch. We've seen that like the number of parties over threshold for that risk driver go up. And from further analysis and also discussions with parties, one of the primary causes for that is a supplier has raised the switch, but CSS has rejected that switch request because another sort of switch for that MPAN is in progress, which we think is like, yep, that's how CSS needs to be behaving, and the supplier who's initiating the switch would not really know if this customer or TPI has initiated another switch with another supplier around the same time. So it's not something that's concerning us at this time, but we continue to monitor that. And finally, some good news. We've actually seen reduction of number of parties over threshold for our erroneous switch risk drivers. This is primarily in like the previous quarter, which ended in April. We'd identified some issues where parties were not correctly using the ES resolution flag in switch requests. We worked with those parties to get that rectified, and that's one of the leading reasons for the decrease in number of parties over threshold for the erroneous switch risk drivers. That's a snapshot of what we've seen from a risk driver performance in the last quarter. If we move along, I think that's what I had to share about what we've seen in the headlines from the last quarter. We'll now look at what we've got in the forward plan. What are we doing in this quarter? What are some of the changes that are coming along? And all my team members on this call are going to speak to you about some of the different areas. I think the first one, I'm going to talk to you about key activities that are in our operating plan in the next quarter. So Jenny, if we move one more slide, please. So yeah, few things that are ongoing right now or imminent. So first thing, risk register update. So we have reviewed the retail risk register, and there is a consultation, a category 3 consultation that is currently live on the rec portal. We've included a link on this pack. There should have also been comms through the change bulletins on this. I encourage all parties to look at it. We've introduced some new risk drivers related to MHHS. We've added the risk driver I mentioned previously around change of occupiers. And we've done some housekeeping changes, etc. as well. The details there in the consultation. So we've summarized all the changes we've proposed within it. So I do encourage everyone to review those changes, and please do share your feedback with us as well. Because the consultation closes on 17th of October, I believe, which is Friday next week. So if everyone can please review it, give your feedback, we will be then looking at the consultation responses, refining the product any further as needed, and taking it for PAB approval and getting the new risk register published at the end of October, early November. Next bit, MHHS migration. Those of you who've been involved with the program know M10 milestone was like we successfully passed M10, which was all systems ready to go. Stop migration last month, 22nd September. We've now got M11, which is migration starting. So people, the first set of MPANs will start moving along into the new settlement arrangements from 22nd of October. So we've been working with the DIP manager to get data to monitor performance in the new world. So again, information on that is proposed in the risk register, and have a look. And we're also continuing to make sure like all parties are ready to support migration, both from our point of forward migration where you're not yet qualified, but someone else is gaining an MPAN from you and migrating it at that point. Or you are gaining an MPAN from a supplier that's MHHS qualified, and that meter point is a migrated one, so you'll have to reverse migrate it because you're not qualified. Those kinds of changes we're going to be making sure parties are all ready to. We've had the assertions and stuff, and like any parties that are not ready, we're working very closely with them to make sure any associated risks are managed. Then moving along. So this year in the operating plan, we've changed a bit of our approach. So our parcels of work, we've identified key areas that would benefit from a performance assurance deep dive. So we've picked some topics through consultation with parties, consultation with PAB, and we've identified these deep dives that we're going to be doing through the year, where there'll be a scoping phase where we'll speak to people to understand what is it you want us to focus on. We'll carry out the work and then publish our findings to the industry. 2 of those are ongoing right now, and I've got Daniel who'll be coming and speaking to you in a bit about the first one, which is on looking at escalation processes under the REC, how effective those are, and if something can be done to improve those. And the other one is data cleanse. Andrew and Anton will talk to you about the sprint 4, which is just finished, sprint 5 that we're kicking off now, and also the future of sprints like sprint 6 onwards. How can we improve the process to get more benefits, like to make it more cost beneficial for the industry? So that's a whistle-stop tour of what we'll be up to in the next quarter or so. I think that's my bit done. I'm going. Oh, actually, there's one more. Jenny, if you move to the next slide, please. Thank you. As we've done all of last year, we've given you a little bit of a checklist for you to see, based on your role, what are the key activities you will want to feed into in the next sort of 3 months or so. So this will be shared with you with the slides. Please have a look. And with that, I will pass over to Daniel to take you through the escalations deep dive.
Awesome, thanks, Lee. So yeah, as you mentioned, we're going to be completing a deep dive of the escalation process for inter-party issues within the scope of the REC. So if you please move on to the next slide. Why are we doing this exercise? Well, you as the industry have told us at a previous PA webinar that you'd like us to complete a review of the current escalation process and its effectiveness. So our Performance Assurance Board also agreed that it was a priority, and so they've included it in our Performance Assurance Operating Plan for the 25-26 REC year. So in terms of why we're viewing this as a priority, I mean, ultimately, an ineffective escalations process will lead to an inefficient retail energy market and will also end up negatively impacting consumer outcomes. So that could include areas such as consumer switching or accurate and timely billing. So I think that the scope of this exercise is for us to review which escalation processes are working well and also which ones are not working well, and for the escalation processes which aren't working well, how they can be improved. Obviously, we don't know yet what the outcomes of this review will be, but it could involve recommending updated processes, publishing guidance documents, and a benefit analysis to support any future cost-benefit exercises, which would also include any downstream process impacts. I think in terms of which elements are out of scope, this exercise is focused specifically on understanding areas for process improvements and not on technical changes to tools such as STEP. So we already have a bunch of open rec changes that have been raised in relation to STEP, such as change 122, 161, 162, and 285. However, any cost benefit analysis that we do as part of this deep dive will likely feed into these and any future STEP changes. So if we please move on to the next slide, I want to talk through, the high-level plan for these activities. So firstly, we're going to launch the deep dive, which is what we're doing right now to inform you as the industry on this activity and also ask for your input as we're defining the scope, which is the next part, refining the scope. So based on the feedback today and some conversations we'll be having over the next couple of weeks, we're going to refine the scope of this deep dive and ask PAB to approve the scope at the end of this month. So after PAB have approved the scope, we'll then complete some field work and I think it says that conducts the investigation. So this will likely include qualitative discussions with you as impacted REC parties and also getting quantitative feedback from surveys and also exporting data from some of the current tools that we use like STEP. So we'll then take all of that information and form some recommendations for process improvements. The exact timeframes for this are yet to be confirmed, but it's likely going to take place over the next handful of months. Then finally, we're going to report these recommendations to PAB and to the industry. And again, the exact timeframes are sort of to be determined based on the final scope, but this will likely be early next year. So as I just mentioned, we're keen for your inputs to help us define the scope of this work. So if we please move on to the next slide. I think I say slide, actually, yes, it's going to be a Slido set of questions around escalations. So I think if we move on to the first question, it's, overall, I believe that the escalation process, so not just STEP, but the general escalation process for REC-related inter-party issues is either mostly effective, partially effective, rarely effective, or not applicable if it doesn't really impact you. I don't know. I know, Jenny, that you're kindly getting the sort of poll stuff ready in the background. If we've got some elevator music or waiting music that we can play. I would do karaoke, but I can't sing, so no one wants that.
That would be good, isn't it? I'll have that ready for next time, Daniel.
Sounds good.
I think we will have to wait a minute while people are responding to all 5 questions, and then we can go through them question by question. Yeah.
In which case, I'll do a bit of a talk over the other questions then, just since you can see them all on the screen. So in terms of the second question, so the first question here is about generally the escalation process. The second question is focused specifically on STEP and whether you believe STEP supports the current escalation process and how effectively. The third question is for us to understand, okay, in terms of using STEP, which STEP sort of bit process types are you using most often? Because obviously those will have a larger impact on the overall effectiveness of the processes and sort of inform the scope of what we're doing. Again, the fourth question is asking you to select all of the escalation processes that you believe are not currently operating effectively. So again, we can make sure that those are a focus as part of the review. And then the fifth one is asking, I think we've had some initial thoughts based on previous conversations over areas that could inform process improvements, but we obviously want to sense check those and give you an opportunity to provide your input on those. I think for the sort of later questions, so the multiple choice ones on which S-step process types you use, which ones are operating effectively, and the inter-party, the areas that you're impacted by. I think if you have any other comments, I'd really encourage you to put those in the chat as well, so we can capture those formally as part of this exercise. And again, we will have an opportunity in a minute as well for just a bit of general back and forth on questions. I think so. It looks like there aren't any active, well, two people responding. So I think we can sort of have a bit of a talk through the results as they're coming in, and then obviously people still have a bit of time to sort of complete this. I think this is broadly in line with what we're expecting, that it was partially effective. In fact, I think most people here have indicated that it's either partially effective or rarely effective, which does show that this is an area that we need to look at in terms of improving that effectiveness. So I think this is in line with expectations, and it's really good to sort of see this feedback written down. I think then, Jenny, are we able to move on to the next one? Yeah. So again, with S-step, it's looking like similar numbers. I think maybe a few more people actually going on rarely effective. So again, that's why S-step will definitely form part of the scope of the review we're completing as well. So thanks, that's really useful. I think if we please move on to the next slide or question. Yep, so broad range of sort of process types here that are being used. And I think, again, this is similar. I know a fair while ago, we did some similar analysis on sort of which S-step escalation process is being used most, and these are some of the common areas that we did think were being used most. So good to know. Again, we'll look at everything, but we do want to focus on the ones that have the most impact on you. So thank you for that. And then Jenny, if we please move on to the next one. Okay, so again, for some of these process types, that's over half of respondents, or a large number of respondents saying that you don't think these are operating effectively. So again, good that we're completing this review. Thank you. And then if we move on to the final question, please. Okay, this is super interesting actually. So it looks like the key area of focus is on making sure that you can obtain responses from other parties. So again, that's something we'll certainly look to build into the review we're completing as a priority item. Well, again, thank you all very, very much for that input. Super, super useful. I think if we do move Jenny on to the next slide. Happy at this point just to sort of open up to any sort of questions or comments that anyone has over the sort of activity we're doing and the scope of it, and particularly as well if you think there's anything that we're sort of missing that we haven't already discussed. So I don't know if anyone does want to raise their hand. Yeah, Mark, please go ahead.
Yeah, obviously one of the things that was mentioned was escalations. One of the things I've said all along about escalations is, fine, we've got an escalation process, and looking at some of the volumes that we get in from other parties, they're quite frequently used. My concern isn't the escalation cases per se, it's why are we getting so many escalations in the first place? Because the number of escalation cases should be minuscule. What it means is we have broken processes or parties not working processes. Therefore, I think that is where the focus should be, to stop you getting to the point of needing to escalate.
Yeah, absolutely. Apologize if that wasn't made clear. In terms of the scope of the exercise, it is very much the entire end-to-end process. That includes stopping escalations from coming in the first place, and also seeing the impacts of where they're not properly dealt with. So yeah, that'll definitely form part of it. And that's one of the reasons we asked the questions on which escalations are getting raised. So what we want to do is look at those areas and see how can we reduce the numbers of those happening in the future. I think Anton as well, you've come onto camera, so I don't know if you have any further comments.
Yeah, so Mark, you're talking about a thing that we term failure demand, where something's gone wrong and then there's work to address that thing. We're not going to live in a world where there is no failure demand. However, you are right. We both need to make sure that where there are issues, that the process to resolve them works, because there are going to be issues and edge cases and oddities. But you're right, reducing the failure demand by fixing upstream systems, process, training, all of those things is incredibly value too. So failure demand, I see a lot of this as failure demand.
Cool, thanks Anton. Cool, do we have any other sort of questions or comments that anyone wants to raise whilst we're on the PA webinar? If not, then I would strongly encourage anyone to email us at performanceassurance@recmanager.co.uk if you do have any sort of initial thoughts, anything you want to discuss over next week as we sort of refine the scope of this activity. And again, please let us know if you'd like us to contact you during this field work to sort of share your experience, and if you'd like to be involved in any working groups or anything like that take place over the course of the review. But I think if there are no more comments right now, I'm going to hand over to Andrew to talk about another ongoing activity we have, which is the data cleanse sprints.
I better come off camera then.
Hopefully,
Hey, everybody.
Yeah.
Well, glad that bit of technology works at least. Thanks very much, Daniel. So if we move on, so we're going to cover 3 things. I'll cover the first 2, and then I think Anton's going to cover the third, just so you don't have to listen to me the whole time. So we'll just give a very quick update on Sprint 4, which is finished. We will be covering some of this material again at RIG tomorrow. Some of you will be at RIG, so we'll do a bit of a sense check. If everybody who comes to this also comes to RIG, we won't say all the same things again. If there's less overlap, then we'll do a bit more. But just a quick update on Sprint 4. And then, as we mentioned at certainly last month's RIG, and I think in a couple of other communications, we decided not to try and move straight into Sprint 5 at the start of this month while Sprint 4 was still finalising, because there was a few open questions. So Sprint 5 will start formally from November. So we're just working through and finalising the scoping for that. We'd like to get some input from everybody on that. And then, as I say, Anton will touch on some longer term changes that we're making to how we really formalise some of what we're doing here and some of the planning that we do around benefit tracking as well. So if we move to the next slide. And again, thank you. So Sprint 4, so for the majority of reporting, so the gas reporting is on a slightly different time cycle, as those are involved in this will be aware. But for all of the electricity derived reporting, that final set of reports as of the end of September have been generated. They're on portal sites. You can go look at your individual performances in the dashboards. But if we do the sort of stand back check, so energized no meter, we were hoping to get that down to 0, except sort of very recently energized MPANs. That has come down quite significantly. So we started with about 38,000 meter points. So there's been a reduction of about 28,000 net there, down to 10,000. Obviously, that is a net movement because there's constantly things coming in and out.
Sure.
So a good result, but not quite there. The majority of those 10,000 are now on 3 specific parties, and if you're one of those 3, hopefully you know that. But we'll talk about what that means for Sprint 5 in a second. So good progress, and thanks for all those who've worked hard on that and indeed all the other reports as well. DNO invalid top line. So we had again a time-based target there. Overall numbers have not moved down massively, although again there has been some in and out churn with it being a time-based target. Obviously that does affect that. Again, I'll touch on some implications of that in a second for Sprint 5, because we think there's a slight change needed there now to get what is a relatively small volume in absolute terms now sort of down, and both of those have linkage to MHHS related activity. In fact, as does the third one. For new meter details, that was the location, the ESMA ID, also the number of digits, although that's a very small number of discrepancies. So again, a bit of a more complicated target. So we were looking to see effectively that that was getting worked, and that the older the installation was, the less issues there were. So of the parties that had targets in that, 28 parties have hit those targets. So well done if you're one of those parties. 11 still have some in either one or either of those conditions. So either more than 10% over a month old or 5% within a month. So there's still a bit more work to do there, and that is obviously a pot again that obviously as more installations happen, there is a risk that things continue to come in there. And then invalid gas map ID. So we were trying to really push it down a lot. Unfortunately, based on the current data, and as I say, we'll have the final numbers early next week because of the timing of the gas data sharing. Actually, the overall numbers haven't really shifted down very much. We have reached out, and if you haven't seen this directly, but you are involved in this particular bit of cleanse, I would flag this. I think the comms have gone out. Tom, who's on the call, can kick me under the table if I say this wrong. Comms went out to contract managers. Obviously, sometimes you may need to reach out to your contract manager to discuss with them. We are trying to get just a really simple, quick response to basically one question, which is, if you are in particular, if you are a MAM, so you needed to send the flows to correct this information, roughly how many do you think you've corrected? Because based on some of the engagement that we've had with MAMs over the course of this sprint and some subsequent conversations with Exaserve, we are trying to confirm whether the action's been taken to provide the data by MAMs, but there is a dependency on some subsequent flows that both suppliers and shippers need to send. And so if that hasn't happened, even though the work's been done over here, the map ID won't get updated. And we're trying to pin down, is it that, no, there's more work to do over here on the MAM side, or actually is it that the MAMs have done the work, but then the subsequent flows haven't happened? If it is the latter case, then we have some things we can do. Obviously, if suppliers haven't sent the right flows, we don't. If they're shippers obviously aren't enviros of REC. So we have a separate parallel conversation going on around whether there is an opportunity for us to do a direct update of data. We don't know that's definitely going to be possible yet, but that's an ongoing conversation because we don't want to waste the work that's been done over here. So if you are a MAM, that request will have gone out. I think it went out on Monday. We're really keen to get a quick turnaround on that. We don't need an exact number. We're just trying to get a sense of, you guys going like, we've done everything we could. It doesn't seem to be moving the dial, or actually is it, yeah, we've done some stuff, but yeah, to be fair, we've got more to do. So if you can help us out with that, that'd be great. As I say, if you are directly involved in that, but you're not the contract manager, please have a chat with your contract manager, help them get a response back. That'd be really appreciated, because that'll really help us make the case if we need to take a slightly different route, and also whether we need to use some of the cross-code sort of engagement opportunities to bring that up with UNC as well. So quick update, there will be more detailed analysis going on over the rest of this month on this. Parties that have hit targets, we will send out comms to confirm that's how we've scored it, as it were. So you will get a thank you note if you like. Those who have not quite made it, we may then be engaging just to understand, are there any other reasons why or any context we need to be aware of, and or whether there's any further action we need to take at an individual party level, rather than from a sprint 5. And if there's any questions on that probably takes us neatly on to sprint 5, which I think is the next slide. So as I mentioned, we're going to start sprint 5 start next month. We wanted to see what those results look like, particularly based on some of the engagement we've been having over the last couple of months with parties. We've also had a report shared with us from the MHHS programme. That programme's data cleanse activity has concluded now. We've got through M10, and they've obviously got some things they've needed to sort of hand over. Some of those come into REC, some of those come into BSC. There are a couple that I'll talk about when I run through these data items in a minute, that come to us now. There is one major item which we don't have on this list because there's a change that needs to happen through BSC governance before cleanse can happen. But just to acknowledge it, because it may be on some people's minds, is that there is approximately 250,000 smart meters that have a valid number of digits from what the deflows say you can have on a smart meter, but actually it's not the number of digits that's physically on the meter. There's I think an assumption in the MPRS validation that it's always 5 for a smart meter. There are some that can't be that. So we're aware of that, but we're not proposing to put it into sprint cleanse currently on the basis that obviously without the system changing, you can't fix it. But it's one that hopefully those affected are already aware of that be engaged in that programme. And then we've also got some new data that's come into us on MEMOES, which I'll speak about. So in terms of candidates for sprint 5, we've got a table there, and I've called out where appropriate what I would call the primary party type. So this is the person who will generally need to take the action to resolve the data issue. And then in some cases, there is a supporting party type. Now, when we say supporting party type there, we really mean a party that we will also provide a copy of their cut of the report too, because they may need to work with that primary party type to help them correct that. They may have the data to help with that. Clearly, there are other areas where there may still be a level of support needed, a slightly less formal level on some of the DPI stuff, for example. It may be that you do want to speak to your MEM to help with that, but where we say supporting party type, what we mean there is the reporting would go to that party as well. So we'll just run quickly through these, and then what we're going to do is we're going to ask a couple of questions in a Slido to get a feel from the room around priorities, and I'll talk about that before we move into that vote. So knocking down quickly, and obviously a lot of these reports are consistent with previous sprints, so I'll talk more about why rather than what they are. So new meter details, as I mentioned, we do still have some 10 or 11 parties that do have gaps there, and we have seen, it's a report that obviously with meter installations continually happening, continues to come through. It's obviously some data that's been a lot of focus on through the MHHS programme, so we think retaining that in the next sprint does have some merit. Invalid gas map ID, as I say, definitely the numbers haven't moved as far as we'd like to. There is obviously that caveat of if it turns out to be a supply super flow challenge that we can't fully unlock, we may need to look at how we do that. So there's a little bit of a question there. You'll be aware, if you're involved in this, over the last couple of rigs, so we have the results of the annual gas CDSP reconciliation, so comparing MAM to CDSP records. That's already been in the reports for the last couple of months that you've been receiving, but wasn't in the sprint. That data is an as of 1 April cut each year. So by the time we got to sprint 4, it was a bit too old. It obviously still has some age to it, but we previously had it in sprint 3, which is a similar time in sprint 5 in the annual cycle. So, and there is definitely still a fair amount of gaps and differences reported there. Again, we propose to prioritise those meters where there is difference across all 3 data items measured, so serial number, model, and manufacturer. We've got some new data now coming in that allows us to compare. So it's a bit similar actually to the gas CDSP reconciliation, but on the electricity side. So the data that MEMS hold versus the data that's held in EES, and therefore within the central registration systems. There's a list of fields there at the bottom of what we're comparing. Based on the data we've got at the moment, and there are some MEMs that haven't provided data. So again, if you're a MEM, electricity MEM, and you haven't provided this is the new 860 and 861 data items. You will either have had or will be getting a reach out from the team, say, hey, we think you need to provide this data. We don't think you have. If you haven't, it's gone somewhere odd, help us find it, please. If you haven't, you do need to be providing it. It is now part of the park. And it is therefore an obligation to provide that. Based on the data we do have from those that have provided it, and thanks to those that have, there's roughly sort of between less than 1% and sort of 7-8% difference between what MEMS hold and ES hold on those various fields. We are for ESME and meter location kind of focusing on there's a valid value in both, but it's different, as opposed to there's a blank ESME ID in one and a populated in the other. So we're proposing to bring that in to the reconciliation, to the cleanse process. Invalid top line. So we've had that in for a while. There's a supplier invalid top line and a DNO invalid top line report at the moment. We have the DNO in sprint 4. Based on the residual population now that we have, and based on the discussions we've had with those DNOs that still have a reasonable proportion of items on this report, we're proposing to make a change at this stage and make that just an invalid top line report, and to make that a joint DNO and supplier exercise. So the current reporting compares the top line to the MDD. We've stopped worrying about it if the only issue is MTC, because clearly MTC is going. So we're looking at the remaining items in that top line. If it looks like LLFC is the only item that is wrong, so everything else would be consistent and this item is wrong, that currently goes to the DNO. If it's anything else, it goes to the supplier. That's obviously an assumption. It's an assumption that goes back to the CSS faster switching program. DNOs who've been working that have been working down errors in LFC, but a lot of the feedback we're getting now is the remaining ones. It's that assumption that it's the simplest solution, i.e. the LFC, it's wrong rather than the other items that are wrong, is now sort of starting to break down. So we think to get through the residual, it probably now needs to be a joint exercise by DNOs and suppliers. And we do also have a question actually about the best way to facilitate that. Interesting, given obviously what Daniel was talking about with escalations before. Energize no meter, carryover from previously, there's still a bit to go on that, and it's important for MHHS because you get the wrong segment if you don't resolve that. We then have, excitingly, the opportunity to do some work around domestic premise indicator, which is something we tried before. There'd been issues with the data that was available in the inquiry service. That has now been populated fully to reflect what's in CSS. We think there are initially 3 definite items to look at, and then I've put an other on there because parties may have a view on something else that they would like to look at. And if you vote for other, we'd be keen obviously to hear your thoughts around what you think the specific thing is that needs to be resolved. So one is unmeasured meter points with a domestic DPI. That sort of doesn't work. So that needs to be looked at. It's a relatively small population, but that does need to be worked down. We previously generated, but as I said, there's problems with the DPI data, but where we've got related meter points, but the 2 meter points in the relationship are inconsistent. So one domestic, one non-domestic. And then thirdly, those who have any involvement in theft will be aware that in the last 2 years, we've had a process through a derogation that's allowed parties to say, hey, I think the DPI is wrong in CSS, and it is therefore giving me the wrong split of my population between domestic and non-domestic, and that obviously has impacts in terms of TDIS. For those who have submitted to as a correction through that derogation, we obviously don't know which ones you need to correct, but I'm effectively proposing we would provide a report back with the full population, and then that would allow you to, for example, if you are a domestic only supplier but you've got some non-domestic, you could work through the non-domestic items, make sure that they do need correcting, make the correction, and then that would resolve the need for that derogation going forward. Happy to extend that report to others who haven't used that derogation in the past, but that would be our starting point, would be those that have. As I say, I've got a bit of a placeholder for is there anything else on DPI? And then the final thing, which is a possible, but it's a very low volume, but it comes from that MHHS data cleanse closure report, is the check meters. So there are some, and I think it's 170 odd. There are a small number of meter points with check meters. They shouldn't be there. Check meters shouldn't be within the central, and it will break the MHS migration if they do. So they need to be fixed. So we could put a cleanse report out on that. As I say, it's a very low volume, so I would see priority-wise, maybe it's not the most important thing, but maybe somebody will tell me that they think it's a bigger issue than I've appreciated. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go into 3 questions through a Slido. So the first is asking where we have got reports, either like the DNO supplier top line, where we're directly asking both parties to work on it, or where we need that kind of primary, secondary, or supporting party approach. Views around the best way to manage that, because we know it can be difficult. Yes, you can raise STS cases across. Those can be quite high volumes. Is that the most effective way? Is there something else that could be done there? So we've got a question around that. Then we'd like to ask for all of the reports that involve supplier in the primary party type, people to rank those in terms of priority. So based on your business, what you know, where you know that you've got issues, or things that cause you issues subsequently down the line, how would you prioritize these reports? Because there are quite a few potential reports there for particularly suppliers. So we're keen to get some feedback on priority. I'd ask that suppliers vote on that question so that we get the view of the supplier community. So if you're not a supplier, please skip that question. And then similarly, we'll do the same thing for the MEM, so the 2 MEM and the MEM report on electricity. Again, if you could vote on that as if you are one of those parties. If you're not one of those, but you have a view, just throw something in the comments if you would. Like, obviously there is clearly impact on other parties if the data is wrong. So we do care about that, but we just want to try and get a bit of a clean view. I hope that made sense. And I can see that the Slido has gone up, so I also will not sing karaoke whilst we wait. Still seeing people responding based on the top left. So we'll just give people a minute. Obviously, there's a bit of ordering to do in the second two questions. So appreciate that might take a minute. Just to check, Jenny, when is it only when somebody submits for the whole thing that we see the results come through? Is that right?
Sorry, Andrew, could you repeat that, please?
Sorry, I was just saying when people submit, it's only then that we see the results for all three come through. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. But we can go through, since we have a few votes for each.
I was going to say, I think we've got a few now.
We can go through
feels
that
like
now.
it's sort of stabilising. So I think it's a pretty clear steer on that first one. That in terms of the majority of views are to put the responsibilities across people rather than having a sort of lead and then relying on them to speak others. So I think, for example, for that supplier DNO top line, that kind of gives us a pretty clear steer on the best way that people want to work for that. Can we look at the next question? Okay.
Yeah, I think we just have the ranking activity on the screen now for suppliers.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Can we just scroll down and see what didn't make it out the box? Yeah. So the other sort of pretty low rated. I presume that is because people haven't flagged anything else specific on DPI. And then if we just scroll back to the top, so really sticking with those key items from the previous sprint that still need a bit of work and linking to MHHS as the top two, and then sort of moving down from there. Mark, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, just a question, because I know you mentioned energize no meter.
Yeah.
How do you determine the age of these? Are you purely using the energization date?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Right. So completely misleading, in effect.
How do you mean?
Well, energize no meter either means there's no meter details when there should be, or the energization status is wrong.
That is obviously a valid scenario. Would be that it is incorrectly energized. Yes.
Yeah, but by using the energized date, and let's say we're taking a meter off the wall, that metering point could have been energized 10 years ago. So it'll appear on the report and it'll look like it's really old, really bad data, but in actual fact, the meter was taken off the wall 2 days ago.
Let me take that away and check that, Mark, because I'm saying we do, and I think we do. But I know we did look at this previously because I remember looking at some particular examples when I was in conversation with somebody a while ago, and we were looking at, hang on a minute, does that make sense? So that's the date. So I may have misspoken. Let me double check the logic before I commit to that. I'll try and do that before Rig tomorrow because I'm sure he'll be on as well. If that is the scenario, obviously we can't look at the meter installation date because obviously there is no meter. But we potentially can track it based on when it came onto our report. So we have the history of the reports, if you see what I mean. So we would be able to say, well, it wasn't there last month, it's there this month, so it's no more than a month old, or it's been there for 3 months, if you see what I mean. So let me double check that. I may have spoken too quickly because I know we did debate that previously when we were looking at some of the data earlier on when we were setting this up.
Do you not see the date the meter was removed in your data? Because I know people don't like mentioning it. We get the SUDS report, so we can see when the meter was taken off. A meter was taken off the wall.
Yeah.
So that would indicate that maybe it's not energized, no meter. It's it's not meter details missing. It's energization state's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a couple of things, isn't it? Or it's sort of if it's literally a day or two, we ultimately don't want to be we don't want to be sort of chasing things where people are sort of still working through the through the process type thing. Obviously it should in principle be correct from sort of day one, but just double checking actually. And I know we get the installation date. I'm not sure if we get the deinstallation date.
It may just be the data set you get.
Yeah, no, it doesn't look like we do from a quick scan. But as I say, I mean, we can easily do a proxy using, as I say, we're essentially generating this report each month, right? So if you were energized 10 years ago, but you weren't on this report last month and you are this month, then clearly something's happened in the last month, right? It's probably close enough in terms of what we're really trying to do is not chase things that happened yesterday. Yeah. So
Yes.
the reason the target is anything over a month old is if there's a bit of operational stuff happening and people sort it, that's BAU. We don't want to get involved. We're really trying to make sure it's the longer term stuff.
Yeah. In that case, what I'd be looking for is stuff that was on a report a month ago and still on there today. I wouldn't use the energization date as the key.
Yeah.
I would say it was on last month. It's on there today. It should have been fixed within the month.
It should have been fixed by now. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, let me take that away, Mark. As I say, I remember looking at this a while ago because I remember thinking some energization dates were a long time ago, but I might be misspeaking. So rather than try and do it entirely off the top of my head, we'll check. But as I say, there's definitely a solution there if that's giving us a false positive, if you see what I mean. Hopefully that's given another picture answer. And then okay, I'm pretty clear stare on the members there as well. I see Anton's come on camera, which probably tells me my flashing red light at the back of the comedy club is coming on. If there are any other comments on that, as I say, we will have another bit of time tomorrow at RIG. So those of you who attend RIG as well, if you have a brainwave this afternoon or want to bring any more thoughts forward in terms of other things that we haven't captured on that list, then please do so tomorrow. Anton, over to you.
So I really appreciate all those providing your input. We definitely like getting your input. The surveys are a manageable way of doing that with 50 odd people, and that direct input, Mark. The bit that I want to talk about is how do we enhance this over time, and we're intending on doing this for Sprint 6. So if we move forward, so we want to enhance our data cleanse process. It's still got the same purpose, hasn't it, to help industry have more consistent data and reduce the risk that poor data gets passed around during switching. But we want to provide more quantified costs and benefits. This will help us take better decisions on which items to prioritize. But also, one of the key challenges we have is working out how much to ask for, and it'll help us with that as well. So we'll do this for Sprint 6, but with Sprint 5 live, we'll have some real examples. So we're going to use some of the data for that, and hopefully I'll explain clearly why. But I guess the key point for all of this, for this idea to work, we definitely need the input of industry, which you have given today, but in a slightly different way. So if we move forward, before I talk about this, I need to make sure everybody's on page with the same terminology. So we currently have 4 categories. You don't need to read the description. I've just copied this from one of the documents, guidance documents we put out, and it gives you an idea on the far right how many were in Sprint 4 for these categories, and one is Sprint that we want you to actively cleanse. Other ones are track, which we think should be maintained, and then a watching brief is things we want to make sure we know what's going on with in case something gets worse, and then we might promote it. And the idea is data items or data reports would move between these categories. Hopefully we would cleanse them and then they would move down. That would be the goal. If we just move on, I just needed to do that so we have the right terminology. We propose to take a slightly more involved approach to setting data cleanse priorities in the future. The first stage will be a call for input, which will be analogous to what we've just done, but we do this in parallel and have done in preparation for this meeting, Sprint 5, is review the sprint items performance. It doesn't make sense if we've sprinted an item and actually it hasn't got to where it needs to be to move on, does it? So we always do that, and we review track and watching briefs in case something's changed in the market and means, oh gosh, we really need to cleanse that item. those are the things that we already do. Now, for the super keen among you, we've written more on our methodology and we've put it at the back of this pack, which will be sent round afterwards. So if you're really interested in how we do those things, there's a page on each basically that you can refer to. But once we've done that, the new bit is that we'll do a benefits assessment where we will try and identify the benefits of cleansing data items, and then we'll engage with industry and request industry costs. For us to do costs and benefits, we can have an idea of the benefits, but those should be validated with industry. We need your input on costs. I think that's really important, and that should help us try and pick the best priorities and make the most of the time that you guys dedicate to this. And then obviously at the end we'll have a finalized sprint item ready for sprint 6, so that we can kind of crack on in the usual process. So if we just move forward a bit, the new bit is something that's worth talking about a bit more. So we plan on identifying the costs that this data item being wrong causes. So that addressing that cost is how we will prioritize benefit. So for example, if an address being incorrect results in erroneous switches, cleansing that address avoids that harm. If there are other types of issue, for example, just the cost of someone switching this customer in and then having to cleanse the item, we're more than happy to identify those. So we actually think inaccurate data doesn't have a one-to-one relationship with problems. It might have a one-to-many, or there might even be a many-to-many relationship. So just for the purposes of this, we've mocked up what an assessment might look like. Now, don't trust the numbers; they're just there so that you can have an idea of what we're imagining. But we would identify like the data item, the report, and the data master who's responsible for that data item. Or as Andrew alluded to previously, there might be multiple organizations who need to work together to address a problem. We should talk about who has an issue if this data is inaccurate, and have some estimates of the costs involved of that issue. This will allow us to identify across the industry like the total possible benefit of cleansing. We will then be able to compare that to the kind of an allocation of costs that we would ask industry to provide, to try and identify which are cost beneficial and prioritization. Now, clearly, we can't just go, biggest number, let's do those. We also need to think about what else is happening in the industry, which organizations need to do it, because it might be, for example, suppliers end up with a lot of the ones to cleanse, but they can't do it all at once. Those kind of pace and rate considerations are still very important to us. I do think we will need to have some areas where we don't get feedback from industry or it's not clear, and I think we'll have to use a notional item for that we will agree with the PAB, just to make sure that is fair. But those are the key ideas. We clearly need to develop the first instance of this. We clearly need to get your input, and in a slightly more engaged way for sprint 6 and 7, we need to involve you a bit more, which I envisage will be through consultation. I guess we have many people who've been through these loops before, and we're happy to try and make sure we tailor this intended improvement in the way that is kind of least demand on you guys, but also kind of most useful. We have to be cost beneficial in this as well. So I guess those were the key things that I wanted to share on these intended improvements. Because running a process is easier when you've got subject matter, we do intend on working through the ones that are in scope for sprint 5, which clearly there's still work to do until that is kind of finalized. That will give us something that we can show people, we can engage with people instead of just kind of this mocked up version. So that's all I wanted to talk about on that cost benefit thing. I think the next subject matter we need to talk about is kind of improvements to the theft detection incentive scheme, which my colleague Andrew will talk you through.
Next slide, please. So there's a few changes going on. So a bit of a summary, what's happening and when. So as of earlier this week, no, last week, in fact, we have started running some updated processes. It's kind of back room really, mostly around how the theft data is processed. And we've talked about that at previous TIG and RIG meetings, I think even possibly the previous PA webinar, but I'll give a quick recap on it as well in a second. In addition, the changes that were developed in R173, although the implementation is technically 259, but if you want to read the meat of the legal change, it's 173, applies for investigations that close with a theft investigation close date of the 1st of October or later. Now, obviously, we won't really have that data coming in yet. I'll come to that in a second, but just to be aware, so that is the change that makes incentivizes site visits and certain types of desktop investigation. So later this month, linked to that change around the new data processing and particularly the ethos matching, there'll be an update made to the TDIS dashboard. So the first round of that being published is the 21st, and that will go live. In addition, we have a new peer comparison that has been added based on PAB discussion over the previous couple of months, actually, that will be based on looking at, rather than confirmed theft, which obviously you can already see in the TDIS dashboards, the submission rate based on relative portfolio of parties. That will initially go live as a peer comparison only available to parties, and you'll just be able to see your performance and everybody else anonymized. That is expected to then become non-anonymized in the new year, but it will remain a sort of private to parties peer comparison at this stage, so it won't be a public peer comparison. We then, from the beginning of December, there is a change in the data format that's linked to the 173 changes. So you will need to start submitting data in the 1342 format, and I'll talk a bit about that in a second. You will be able to submit data from the 1st of November in that format if you want. So if you got on with it early and you want to start doing that, that's okay. But it does need to be from that 1st of December date. And at that point, you won't be we won't be accepting 1341 files any longer, and we'll flag rejections through the dashboard. It will probably remain on the portal for a little bit of time because there's a cutover point that needs to happen. But you will need to submit data in that 1342. So please make sure you do that. And again, linked to that, we will then start in December a smaller change to the dashboard that will start to show closed but unconfirmed theft reporting. So that being the items that are now being incentivized under that 173 change. So that will start to become available. From then, obviously, we're not expecting loads of those initially because that's the sort of first data cut. But obviously, that will build up over time. And then, as I've mentioned, that peer comparison will flip over to a non-anonymized view from the January publication. So those various mid dates, because that's the dates the dashboard update. If you're wondering why the random dates. So just to go into a little bit more detail on some of those things, some of this we have covered in previous, as I say, webinars, RIG meetings, TIG meetings, other comms. So there's lots of material out there already, but just to give a quick recap. So the big impact and the changes to the dashboard that are coming out this month are mostly about this ethos matching. So we are matching on meter point with some windowing, investigation data submitted with the ethos leads. We get provided with a list of ethos leads distributed to parties. We're looking to really do that to make sure those leads are being investigated correctly and timely based on the requirements of Schedule 7 and 8. The matching is a best match approach because at the moment we don't know the lead you actually use to investigate from, if you see what I mean. So we will match it based on meter point. And as I say, we've got some rules around kind of not matching something from 3 years ago to a lead from yesterday or whatever it might be. So that will be effectively rematched fully every month, because it might be, we've matched it to an investigation from 2 weeks ago, but actually it turns out you raised a second one when you got an Ethos lead and we just didn't have it yet. So that'll come through. And there'll be a whole bunch more reporting in the dashboard that will show what's been matched to Ethos leads, what the outcome of those Ethos lead matched investigations are, and how that compares to the overall population. That's obviously primarily about understanding the value of the Ethos lead process and the associated Crime Stoppers activity. And we will also be including, and you'll be able to see your data only, obviously, for this, but literally a list of these are all the leads that we hold from Crime Stoppers for you. These are the investigations we've matched them to. So if you are showing on the summary that we don't think you've investigated 20% of your Ethos leads, you can literally go in and see these are all the leads with the references. These are the investigations we've matched them to. And either you can go, right, okay, why have we not investigated these? Or if you think you have and that hasn't matched, then please do feed back to us. As I say, it's a best match basis on meter point. So there may be some tweaks we need to make to that rule over time, based on feedback. So yeah, dashboards will come out in the October refresh. We've done a couple of demos of those dashboards before. We won't do one today just for time. There will be a video walkthrough and also an updated user guide. They should be live, I think, next week. So you've got a chance to go and have a little look around those beforehand. Once the dashboards are live, if it's clear, there's a lot of demand for it, we'll run a drop-in session specifically for that if there's a need, but hopefully they're relatively intuitive. So we've just moved to the next slide. Again, we've talked about this before, but the other thing that we're doing as part of that change is we're making some changes to primarily kind of back end, really, I guess, in terms of data processing. But as part of that, we've added some additional validations. A number of those are anything that is a hard validation, either will prevent a theft going into TDIS, are not new rules. So there are no new rules being implemented here. We're just changing how we monitor and report on them. We are adding some what we're calling warning validations. So they do not prevent something being considered for TDIS, but they will show up on your dashboard as a warning and might indicate there's a challenge with some of the data. And if you have a lot of warnings, then it's probably more likely we might come and ask you about what's going on there, because that might indicate something's not quite right. So again, that'll all come through in that dashboard update on the 21st of October. I've got on the next slide a list of what they are. I won't go through them all in detail now, and hopefully they're all kind of pretty self-explanatory. That slide, as Anton said, has been distributed with the rest of the pack. So obviously you can see those. And if you do get one of these, literally you get a table that says this investigation ID for this meter point, this was the file you gave us it in, and this is the validation check. It hasn't passed. So it should be pretty intuitive as to what you need to do. And as I say, you've got whether that's a rejection or a warning. If it's a portal rejection, that means it's been done at the initial file submission stage. So if you get that rejection and it won't let you put the file in, then that's that. The others need a bit more logic that we need to do relative to other data that's held. So needs to be done. Excuse me, it needs to be done once it's come across to us. So yeah, as I say, hopefully they're pretty self-explanatory, and the list will be shared. If we go to the next slide. So then the other thing just to flag is, and again, there's already been some comms on this, but we just want to make sure everybody's really aware of this. So there was a change to the file format from the beginning of December. That was in the September release, so it's in the park now. But the first submission that it's due on is beginning of December. So that's a 1342 rather than 1341. You can see the pattern here. There are some new fields added to that, 3 new fields. So fuel type, so we can directly see that as well as deriving it from the meter point, which is what happens at the moment. The theft investigation type, which is really about supporting the 173 change, because we need to know. And we would expect, broadly speaking, most will move from incomplete to a desktop investigation to a site visit. There is also an other option available. Those are the text descriptions. They're actually single-digit letters when you submit the data. That's all in the park, but obviously giving you in English for this session. And then also within that, there will then be the ability to include the ethos lead. So that will change how we do that ethos matching once that data starts to come through. And therefore, we'll be in a world where we've got ethos matching based on you've told us the lead, and then matching of the residual where it's pre this new file type. You must populate that if it's a Crime Stoppers investigation lead source, because obviously that's the source. Otherwise, populate it if it's an investigation that you had also identified from another lead source, to allow us to track that. And obviously, if you complete a desktop investigation with an ethos lead, then that results in an incentive through the changes. There's also some fields being removed, some data that isn't necessary anymore for the operation of TDIS. So just trying to make sure, again, we're minimizing data held. So as I say, submissions for the beginning of December must be in 1342. The portal will still accept at that point 1341s, but we will reject them in the data processing, and they will get rejected out through that route I mentioned through the dashboarding. If you want to, then you will be able to submit that from the 1st of November or any time after the 1st of November. So you can submit on the 12th of November or 27th of November or whenever you fancy in November. If you've got a file and you want to upload it, and just sort of make sure you're ready to rock and roll for December. It is there in the drop down now, but all the validation isn't turned on. So I mean, technically you could upload a file now, but it won't really test that you've got the validation right. So I wouldn't bother. And then I think we've got one more slide. Oh no, sorry, no, I lied. We don't have one more slide. We've got V talking about the engagement plan. Let me just pause there for a second, although I know we're quite tight on time because there's quite a few updates there on TDIS. Again, slides will be available if you want to go through those in detail offline.
I don't think there's any questions for you, so maybe I
over
present.
to you. Yeah,
brilliant. Thank you. Jenny, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So yep, like we did last year at the start of the performance year, we are sharing a plan for the rest of the year, what we plan to cover at the webinar every quarter. On the left-hand side, we've got topics that we'll cover, which will be like our one-off deep dive topics, just to give you an idea of what we're doing, what we're seeing, and also gain your views on those areas. On the right-hand side, we've got our standing agenda items, which we'll sort of cover every quarter. Things like looking at performance, looking at activities in the coming quarter, and also giving you updates on any in-flight deep dives. So basically, it is as it says on the slide. If there's anything you were expecting to hear from us about in these webinars and you don't see it on the slide, please let me know now, or again, drop an email to the performance assurance at rec manager mailbox, and we can tweak this and make sure the agenda that we're going to be covering works for you and gives you the most information you need about performance assurance.